Hello everyone, I hope you're doing well. So I wanted to make a video similar to last year's Year in Type of Moon where we go over the announcements and releases, but sadly we can't really do that because besides FGO there wasn't anything. Fate Strange Fake, I thought I might have jumped the gun on this since they released episode 1 last year. I thought they would stream week after week. I guess that was actually happening this year. Just to be brief on it, I've been loving it. It is so much fun with all the cast has been really bright and cheerful, and there's also some hints of mystery I'm looking forward to as well. And then Extra Record was supposed to be coming out, I believe in the fall, but that got pushed back to spring of this year. The Mihoyo movie as well is something still up in the air as to when that'll come out, but I think that's in the bin with Girls' Work. We haven't heard a thing about it since. There might have been some novels that I don't necessarily remember off the top of my head that have came out this past year. I'm not too keen into the light novel side of things. Right now, I've kind of realized that with Strange Fake, and so I'm starting to read the case files of Lord El Malloy II, and first volume has been really fun so far. A lot more exposition of Magecraft lore, which I wasn't expecting, but I appreciate it. What I really want to talk about is the one major piece of Type Moon that we got, and that is Fate Grand Order Part 2's finale. It is a big topic, and bear with me as I give my raw thoughts on everything. Hi, this is the me cutting in after editing everything, and I just want to give an apology first and foremost. As you can probably already tell, I'm not the best at speaking to the mic face to face like this, especially without a script, so you're going to hear a lot of stumbling, a lot of a lot of misuse of words and broken grammar, but I wanted to keep it authentic right off the mind, so I'm just putting up a small warning and apology, and if you decide to stick with me, I thank you from the bottom of my heart. Anyway, let's begin. I've been following FGO for 7 to 8 years now. I joined around the time of the Karuno Kyokai rerun, I believe, 2018, 2019, somewhere around there. And ever since I got to the Lost Belts, it's been so dear to me. I haven't talked about it as much as I probably could or should have, and so I kind of want to do that right now. I didn't want to make a full scripted video because some of those earlier parts of the story I am a bit vague about. The earlier Lost Belts, the singularities, and if I make a video on Fate Grand Order, I want it to be a commemoration of the whole game. This past weekend I reread the final chapter. Given that when it released, it was kind of separated throughout a week to kind of build up parts of the story, the raids, and so I just wanted to give a clean one sitting read through again of it, and I came to the question of how did it get better? The first time I read it, absolutely loved it, emotions were overflowing, and then as the days simmered down, there was a few things, like more of the plot-related explanations that I kind of tilted my head at, and then read it again, and I circled all the way back to being overflowing with emotions, and still am. So for now, I want to give a TLDR, TLDL, TLDW, however you're consuming my thoughts, and kind of just a quick, brief, spoiler-free overview, which can pretty much amount to: it was an ending I don't think could be any better in my eyes. The emotional and thematic beats it built and hit is something I wasn't even expecting, even with all the years of build-up and expectations, and to see it hit the home run at that end, it is a ending I'm going to always remember. There were some plot beats I was interested in seeing explained, but having reread it, I can see why they left a few gaps there. That concludes the spoiler-free segment. If you haven't read the finale, please don't spoil it for yourself. It is incredible. So, I guess what better way to start than where everything began and where everything started to come to a close. Singularity X, or Singularity F, was a lot different than what I initially expected it to be. It's also a plot point that I've been very interested in over the years. There's been so many small hints of foreshadowing that there's still something going on in Fuyuki, you know, with Angura Mainyu's interlude, and I think a few mentions with Saber Alter and Emiya throughout the years, but I can't exactly pinpoint what it was or how to do. Originally, that's what I thought Ordeal Call 2 was going to be focused on. Instead, though, it looks like they just kind of crammed this small little section into the final chapter. At first, I thought it was a little bit weird with kind of the pacing and everything going back right at the beginning of what's supposed to be this final confrontation. But looking back, I thought it plays out a lot better in retrospect, because what it's trying to do is establish an emotional pillar, mostly in Olga Mari. She's a character I wish we could have seen more sprinkled throughout part 1. Sadly, they just kind of killed her off without much of an arc, and even though it was such a short time, I really enjoyed the time seeing her open her heart, even just a little bit. We get a sense of who she is deep down, someone not burdened by the world and the position her father put her in, but something genuine. The fact the only spring memories she had was in her final hour spending time with people she could rely on and who could rely on her, was just that final dose of tragicness that hurt the heart so much. Especially when we learn more about her father, Marisbury, who we do see a little bit of in Singularity X with Solomon. This is one point where I wished this part of the chapter was a bit longer, because I feel there's so much potential with Marisbury and Solomon's relationship throughout this Holy Grail War. Maybe seeing how Solomon takes to Marisbury's ideal and maybe some of the conflicts that could possibly arise in it, even though that he himself has proclaimed that he likes Marisbury's dream and that the fact that he's chasing after it, despite the fact of how bad that could be for humanity. But we'll get a bit more into that later. The fact that this game has been building so many mysteries hidden behind sci-fi and fantastical elements, while bringing about an answer that makes complete sense with what everything's been built up to be, is just something I have to commend. That the singularities that popped up weren't just random encounters caused by Getia to enact his plan, but were the very pillars of the human order Marisbury tried to eliminate in order to better set up his master plan here in part 2, was one of the many twists that just clicked so perfectly. It's something that went completely over all of our heads in the beginning, finding its spot right here, giving a lot of depth to Artoria's character in this moment, as well as just how much Marisbury can and has been doing behind the scenes. It perfectly sets up who he is and only further establishes him as a bigger threat than what was thought possible. But aside from the twist and I think Olga's character here, the one thing I would have liked to see more of Fuyuki was the established character dynamics, mainly with Solomon and Marisbury, as said before. But I also wanted to see a bit more of the round table dynamic that Saber Alter and Mash had at the end there. The sort of battle disguised as training at the end there to solidify Mash's growth and improvement over the years, while also marking the end of Artoria's pillar as the safeguard of the human order, defending the evidence that Marisbury has planted throughout the years. It was a really nice gesture, a touching moment really. And just me, like the Marisbury Solomon thing, it's just my selfishness of wanting to see a bit more into the intricate feelings that they hold. But that's really it. The same thing with Kide's role as well. I really liked the parallel between his role in Heaven's Feel, substituting Angra Mainyu for Mars Caldius as a being who has yet to commit sin, but curious to see how they will react after being born in sin. That sort of thing I thought was really cool, but didn't really see an overarching point to it. Like it's kind of disconnected between everything else that's been going on. A nice nod, but maybe I'm just not seeing it. I think that's the more likely case. That pretty much marks the end of the Singularity X. And as soon as we leave there, we go straight to Area 51, where It is one bone-chilling reveal after the next when we finally come face to face with Marsbury. For a character that's been built up for over 10 years, it's really hard to hit the right marks in making him menacing, but also mysterious in what exactly he was trying to do. What did David mean when he said that Marsbury would make Earth enemies of the universe, right? There's been so many small hints and nods from Mash, Chaldea, everyone. And to finally see him, it's so rare for expectations to be met, but they really did. As soon as his sprite came up, it was just that instant feeling of tension, especially because with the way he conducts himself, he's we know, right, from everything we've heard, and even within this scene, what we learn about what he did, especially to our emotional pillar, we see just how twisted, but oddly how loving, rational, and caring he is. Genuine. And I say all that, but the drastic measures he's taken just makes him such an menacing entity to come face to face. With Marsbury, I can't help but think Nasu's trying to one-up himself when it comes to just how horrible he can make a parent figure, because, man, everything with Chaldeus Earth and Olga's involvement, the piece she was supposed to play. If what happened in Singularity X was tragic, this is 10 of those. Regardless of Lev's interaction, what she would have been tormented to is just so sad. Directly because of Singularity X, it does so much to pull off this twist and make us genuinely care. The whole scene on the table, and all the references to that, I was very dreadingly clicking away. And does a really good job of setting up just existential fear and a century's worth of pain on a scale that we can't even comprehend. Did a very good job conveying that. Chaldeus Earth is also another pretty interesting point, because I wanted to know a bit more about Marsbury's ideal for humanity. What exactly did it look like, you know? How would a humanity who only functions on the exterior work? As a society, as individuals? I kind of wanted to go into that a bit more, and maybe see if Chaldeus Earth was maybe more what he envisioned, being all kind of unified in almost a hive mind. They didn't go too deep into the specifics, but they did go quite a bit into the state of society and how further advanced it was by being able to have that mental link between each other and the surroundings completely due to Marsbury's circuits. That scene where he references Trom, the little branch on the bed that made no sense at first. That was really creepy. There were some more questions too I wanted to get out of it. I was a bit more interested as well in the sort of method and process of the bleaching, a bit about the event storage that he invokes upon, Earth. I wanted to get a bit more deeper into the specifics of his plans, but that's just because we've been following this for so long, and I just find Type Moon lore, the whole magic and stuff like that, very interesting, especially with how deep some of the fantastical elements can go. But they kept it pretty brief, which, nothing wrong with that, just like selfish desire to learn more. But then, if we got the emotional pillar and most of the mysteries out of the way and established, what better way than to follow up with a confrontation that manages to maintain such a level of excitement and adrenaline from the very beginning all the way to the very end. But it doesn't necessarily start out that way. In fact, we get probably one of the biggest plot twists of all time, that on top of what the first plot twist did for the singularities, this recontextualizes the entire game from zero. That being that from the very beginning, our world, the entirety of Fate Grand Order has been a lost belt. And that much like the others, we too have to prune this one. It makes sense. It makes so much sense once you actually think about it, and is one of those theories that you think about and you're like, kind of toss aside. You're like, no, there's no way. But seeing all the evidence brought up, it clicks right into place as soon as you hear it. Because that's one thing I've been wondering about in specific, that why is the Fate Grand Order timeline so different from every other piece of Fate and Type Moon series in general? Fate Grand Order is very special because of Marisbury and Chaldeus. Just how incredible a piece of technology that it is, and just doesn't get brought up at all anywhere else. Of course, the whole multiverse timeline, that this is a very special one, is valid, but with how drastically different it is from everything else is just one of those sparks of inquiry. Just what's going on behind the scenes? And this one thing completely turned it on its head. It's one of those things too, where I really appreciate just how great and crazy some of the feats Marisbury pulls off here. Because not only did he acquire or be able to, I think it was mirror the Earth Soul to create Chaldeus, but then he creates the Lost Belt, of course, and then a reflection of the swirl, and sets up a pretty interesting foil to us in Maris Chaldeus. Being a beast of logic where they try to decide and affirm the right path history should go down for the sake of human prosperity, kind of following in the footsteps of Marisbury's ideal a bit. However, sort of misrepresents what he stood for at the basis. His view of how things should be was based in his own rationale and emotions, his own love for humanity, which later on you kind of see Maris lacks a little bit, making Maris not only an interesting foil to us, who tries to preserve history for what it is, flaws and all, every single bit of it. Maris is also a foil to Marisbury and a bit of its own self and ideology that gets fleshed out later on. They were an antagonist that I didn't really feel too much for at first. My first impression that they were just the big bad we had to defeat that kind of just defies our own goal. But when I think about them a bit more, there's a lot more depth that was originally there with their character that I find incredibly interesting. And through their actions and what Maris is essentially forcing us to do, it brings a really emotional scene for Chaldea and their own want for safety, their own regrets and attachments to the journey. Everything that they've been working for has to be wiped out in order to affirm what we've been working towards. Sort of the records of everything is going to be lost, and we see that. Very brief, but through the cryptors, the manifestation of each of the Chaldea staff's doubts. And then we get Mash's scene. And her feelings as well, I could really relate to. Mash is a character I've really been interested in with this shift of the Lost Belts, even though I feel like the earlier chapters kind of don't utilize her as well as she could have been. Part 1 had a really good foundation for her humanity and exactly where she will go, and the Lost Belts have been slowly developing that, giving her a heart, helping her find a purpose, and seeing the beauty outside of Chaldea. She's always been a very passive character, active in her duty, but very passive and reserved in her personality and her more complicated, unsavory thoughts. And so here, especially after her arc in Lost Belt 6, a few scenes in Lost Belt 7, and especially Ordeal Call 4, having her so proudly proclaim how much Chaldea and their journey has meant to her, and her vehement pleas to just have this all end, really spoke to me. But even more so was seeing how influenced she was by Fujimaru, their actions and defiance, even in spite of their own doubts. How she took the stand alongside them purely because it's the right thing to do for them. It's what, sincerely, even though it's an unfavorable outcome, that means nothing in the face of what their failure here would mean, which comes together so well to reaffirm what makes FGO so inspiring to me, that humanity will always push forward no matter what. Whether it's to the point of decline or peaceful stability or overambition that drives us into the ground. Here is one of the best representations of that. It falls right in line with what the ordeal calls were supposed to establish. To be honest, I don't remember quite well Ordeal Call 1, but Ordeal Call 2 was kind of that, establishing the love of the journey and appreciating the moments that we went through and learned. And then with Ordeal Call 3, learning that at some point, humanity is going to have to pass on the baton. Then Ordeal Call 4 was to mentally prep Fujimaru and MASH to deal with Caldeus' sin. For all the worlds we exterminated, we now need to do the same for our own. Not just our world, but our memories, meetings and partings, experiences, the comrades at our side. Only once we've cast all that aside can we truly repent for all the worlds we took away. But even in the face of all that, we can still stand up and proudly declare that we will fight against that, even if it means everything we went through won't be remembered. And I think it's the resolve and passion, determination to make that choice, to essentially sacrifice not only oneself, but the journey itself, to sacrifice everything they've been together just to pass on the baton, essentially the ultimate form of sacrifice on a personal level, but the one that yields the highest rewards for human history. It's so inspiring. And what follows, how they actually come about besting this beast at their lowest, is honestly, I think, one of the most exciting parts of the entire game. There's certainly some I would rank on the same level. I think Lost Belt 7 near the end, the whole Ort raid was incredible. But what I think this finale fight does so well is how it's able to carry on FGO's most prominent themes through nearly every piece of dialogue. Every confrontation and talk is purely about humanity's sacrifice and the nature of humanity to continue to push on, do what they believe is for the best. It just amplifies what I think is the most inspirational part of FGO. But here, it's just one scene after the next. I kind of forget that it's such a small scene, but the return of Holmes, which is something I've been waiting on for a while. I just love his character, and even though they've been pretty steady that Holmes dead, he's not returning, there's always that feeling of, yeah, he's coming back in some way, even if it's for a small part. Using the loophole of him being an apostle, Maurus's summoned servant, works out so well, especially with the scene it then gives for Solomon, or I guess Lev, to take hold of that moment. And this right here, the music especially, is something it's been in my head for weeks now. The whole thing just is such a good send-off to Lev a second time. With his final line, "O Heavenly Father, have mercy on this beast." It's really been kind of going around the head a little bit, because I see a bit of a double meaning in it. I think one definitely goes to Getia himself, the other to Maurus. In Getia's case, that mercy being wanting of forgiveness for all of his past sins, what he did to Olga, the incineration of humanity, that even though his sins are almost insurmountable and in no way like justifies or excuses it. In the end, he decided to commit one final act of good, using all of he can as repentance for everything, which solidifies a good note to end his character on a second time. Something that actually builds on from the first. And then the second part of the meaning, I really saw it attributed to Morris, Beast the 7 of Analysis, who makes a lot of sense that he would say that Morris is not qualified to be a beast, because the very essence of beasts, being that they love humanity so much that they try to constrain it in their own way for what they see is a better future, for it doesn't necessarily understand the emotions of humans at pretty much at all. Holmes, I think, catches them a few times that Morris wouldn't have to ask us why we're doing such things if it understood our nature. Essentially being to excuse this beast who's ignorant of their own defects and arrogance, that is then trying to oppose their own worldview on us, even though they themselves are heavily flawed. And yet again, it's then followed by such a beautiful scene. I've notes written down, and as soon as my eyes kind of laid over them, the music started playing immediately. And that's when all the servants come raining down almost as stars in the void. And Holmes says, "Taken the end of your stargazer's journey, the count and the shooting stars shining through the hollow cosmos." The artwork, the music, the whole build up with Solomon and Lev's sacrifice to here that it's not just Chaldea who's willing to forsake ourselves. The Lost Belt residents willingly trying to take down the last records of their own, and now proper human history calling to our aid because of our choice. There's so many factors at play, I'm not going to be able to properly say it all just off the top of my head. Again, I could write thousands of words on just this few scenes, and the meaning they kind of hold in me and the wider implications of Grand Order's thematic journey. All of this then leads into the raids, which in terms of the story there was a few days of downtime, I would say closer, maybe 4 or 5 I think. And it kind of leads into a personal anecdote I have playing the raids through that period. The raid started on December 23rd, 24th. Regardless, it was very interesting because while the raids were very rewarding, there was a lot going on. There was 20 million lives per tree. There was 8 trees in total. It was so much fun every so often just to check up, how are we doing here? How are we doing here? While myself grinding a ton. I've always struggled with QP on this game pretty much every month. I get a new servant and I can't do it because not only these, and these materials, but I have 2 million QP. I can't do anything. And at the same time, I'm really lazy. I don't want to grind the QP. I'm just gonna wait. And these raids got me up to 1.6 billion, which is not even an accurate account because I was upgrading so many servants while doing it. I feel like my chains have been broken and I was able to level up anyone I wanted. But now I have 1.4 billion and I'm missing a ton of materials. I got sidetracked. Anyway, I kind of had this realization. It was Christmas Eve. I went out to go see family, and as family talks died down, I sort of sat amongst the crowd and was like, well, why not grind out some? And while doing so, I had this realization that even though I'm getting, all these materials, rewards, I love FGO as a game, and this whole chapter up to this point has been the reason why. It was that moment of relief and satisfaction with all that this game's provided that I came to a sort of peace and accomplishment where even though this was 1 in a million, I wouldn't care if the server shut down. It got EOS for whatever reason. Maybe to make downtime for another FGO gotcha or whatever, really. And Even though, yeah, they've confirmed that there's an 11th year, it no way was gonna happen. It was the satisfaction and peace that, even if it did, even if that 1 in a million happened, everything we've been through, it would have been worth it. And it was that very satisfaction that I think really got me emotional after the raids. It took I think it was December 28th when the final tree got wiped out. And it brought with it one of the most, again, inspiring pieces of fiction that I have read. For the video's sake, I'm pretty sure there's an embargo going on when it comes to showing clips, everything past the raids. So if you're wondering why I just switched to grinding or past clips, that's why. The scene directly after we felled the final tree and got a lot of insight into Maris Caldius's mindset and of everything that's going on and its constant failings. We get a few moments that I feel try to break out of just Ritsuka's character, and it's one of those weird moments where it feels like my thoughts are the thing on screen. Where we get Fujimaru just at the depths, and you have that little header at the top that says, "Until the end of the Grand Order, 0." Just the desolation of having that sense of failure after everything, but at the same time, not giving up even at the depths. And a lot of that is because of Olga, the final star in the cosmos. Once again, why Olga is the best, who, even with all she's gone through, she's still holding out, subjecting herself to another 2 years of torture just to buy us time to stop what's put her and us in this position. Personally, I had a few theories on why the universe update was taking 2 years, and that had something to do with Zelrech. Essentially, it was more from like a scientific, something has to be observed to be properly updated and classified, and Zelrech being outside of time pretty much. But that was mostly me just wanting to see Zelrech in a proper form and actually have a role, because I've been obsessed with this guy since he was mentioned in Stay Night when I read it for the first time. But even seeing my theory crumble just like that, I teared up. There was a lot of scenes in here I teared up, and this scene here was the first time. After things died down, we got that sort of resolution to stand back up. That was the second time. It's so short, but it's such an inspiring piece. The intro to the final battle is something I've rewatched so many times. At the absolute lowest, the words of, "This is not a battle to defeat, it's a battle to save," as Fujimaru stands up, full of life and resolve, with Gyakko as a theme in the background. It is perfect. And then we get a boss battle that I really liked how it was designed from the freedom aspect, using all these grand servants that we've acquired through this past year and have been constantly leveling up, powering up. Oh, then we get with every bar break, all the Lost Belt residents and cryptors, the memories of them and recollection come out to help. It was so great. It's a boss fight that just makes you feel glad to have finally reached it, and reaffirms all that you've been grinding for and all the experiences we've been through with everyone who shows up to help us in these final moments. I am just so mad that I can't replay it. For some reason, it's one of the biggest pet peeves I have of this game is just not being able to replay certain bosses. And this is one I 100% would. I don't think it has as much novelty as something like Ort or the difficulty of Kernanos, and I think it's that way for a reason. In fact, I do wish the difficulty was upped a bit more. This is where I kind of felt the game was a bit lenient in the fact that it wanted you to mostly just use your grand servants. You really don't have to focus too heavy on having the perfect team composition. especially with like the order change they give you. I only used one support, and that was 3rd Ascension Olga Mari. That was my only support. I had so many MVPs. I had Arcuade, who I've cherished since she first came out. My only 120 MP5 SSR, and she nuked that. I think it was the first bar. Sadly, she didn't serve too much of a purpose later on, but for that one bit, she did quite well. The rest, I used Iori, who, again, I don't use him too much, but here, he just absolutely killed. And I finally found a good spot for Mandricardo. He's been my grand level 100 since Atlantis on both my NA and JP account. And here, he did really well. Tonelico as well had some great damage and also a little bit of supportive capabilities. The one servant who I was really happy to test out here and beat my expectations of what they did was Soljido, actually. He's been my cherished ever since I read Mahoyo, and was so glad when he finally made his way in as a welfare. I immediately 100'd him. As soon as the Berserker Grand came out, my mind was set. And Soljido here, especially with all the extra buffs and Tonelico's guts, his getting his Bond CE, he managed to break a few bars. He did really well, and again, with Tonelico's second attack skill, getting higher the less HP they have, that worked for the best. He really put in some work there, and I was happy to finally have a good use for him. Purely due to guts. He's pretty underrated. You just have to really be careful and build him right to have the maximum effectiveness, and given he's probably one of my favorite Type Moon characters, I was willing to make that. But in the end, it was such a good fight. I just wish it was a bit more difficult, because I managed to complete it on my 3rd try. I think the first time I went in, got maybe 2 or 3 bars, kind of got the pace of the fight, backed out, went back in, made a wrong move on something, didn't wipe out the first bar first turn, so I backed out and then went in a 3rd time. And there I completed it. I will say there was a few close calls, but in the end, I think it was 14 turns that I managed to do it in. Overall, great fight, but I love difficulty, especially those I have to like suffer for. Krononos was a big one, and I don't think it challenged us in the same way that the past final bosses did. Like Krononos again, you had to have very good healing, very good defense, while also having really good offense. And Ort is just a whole beast. I don't think we will ever have a sense of scale and as big of a spectacle as Ort was. Ort was essentially testing your overall roster, making sure that every little servant had a point and purpose over the years, to where you had to rely on 3 stars, some of the weaker 4 stars, and of course your best, and how to use them strategically at the right time to make it through. Myself, who was kind of rushing through on my JP account, because I was playing it mostly for the story and haven't really been grinding it at that point, I had to spend 2 or 3 days grinding random mats so I could level up my 3-star servants. It was a whole endeavor. And Maris, I didn't really feel that it challenged you in any specific way. As long as you were keeping up with the grand quests, I guess that's the main grind, is the class and grand scores. Regardless though, I don't want to make it sound like I'm hampering on the fight too much. I love it, and for that intro alone, I wish I could play it again. Finally bringing down Maris Caldeus. It's a moment of relief and satisfaction, finally getting to this build-up and destroying the big bad that will end everything. And in that same vein, should be a bit unsatisfying. I mean, this entire journey essentially amounts to nothing when you look down at the smaller scale of Chaldea and their journey. However, I never really felt that, and I think that's for a few reasons. One essentially being that this twist and result didn't come at the very end. Like, we destroy Marsbury and then all of a sudden it's the case that, everything's for nothing. This very outcome was a result of all of Caldeus's choices and resolve knowing that that's going to happen. A voluntary choice to forsake everything we went through in favor of pushing forward and passing on the baton. We get a lot of Caldeus's doubts and how in spite of that they will still take a step forward. It's a very commendable choice. That is kind of my main reason as to why, even though the result seems to betray everything, I think it goes hand in hand. Along with my second reason being that there will be people to remember. As we know, David is one of them, but I'll touch on his scene a bit later. And the others is us, the players. And there is one major flaw with it, and that all has to do with Fujimaru's characterization throughout the years. They are admittedly a bit wishy-washy on how they're written, essentially following two main guidelines that the writers and Moment will kind of switch between. One just being the character canon version of Fujimaru, the ordinary person stepping up to save the world in an extraordinary manner. We see a lot of their common doubts, something that we could easily relate to being a common person. And then on the other side of the same coin, he's also a vessel for us, the player. And the reason I even factor this in is because the final chapter does take the liberty of breaking the fourth wall a bit. With BB, a bit of Mars Caldeus, and the very specific timing that Mars gave that while talking to Fujimaru could also be seen as talking to us. Just feeling like Fujimaru's thoughts projected on the screen were my own. It's stuff like that where I can't completely rule out this interpretation. Chaldea, and the world for that matter, might not remember the journey, but we will. We can be the record keepers and essentially be the ones to remember, cherish, and keep in our hearts the story of these guys. I think that's what Nasu wanted to represent with Chaldea. Just like the many thankless heroes that no doubt exist in our history, peoples whose names or deeds were never written down and their names lost in memory, but who have an impact we can still feel today. The people who've inspired the history we know of and have learned about throughout the years. While we may never know of them, they have no doubt passed the torch to the next generation. The lead up right after this future was set in stone. The main scenes afterwards do not hold back either. There's a few scenes I want to touch upon, and they all have to do with a theme I've been mentioning throughout this long ramble. The human nature to do good, or want to do good. Everything that I mentioned before, the thing with Solomon, with Fujimaru's actions, with Olga, it is the main thematic foundation for this chapter. Even with all the evil and pain we instill and inflict, there's always that want to do what's best. Whether that's for the greater good or for ourselves, it is always in our nature to do what we think is right. And I didn't realize how prevalent this pillar is until going back after Shion's scene. Her motive to help out Chaldea, no matter how trivial, the fact that it's what she wanted to do, because what she thought is right is something that can be seen through the final chapter so many times. It's really a scene I wasn't expecting from Shion. She completely stole the spotlight there, bringing a sense of what fate is, especially when Nemo comes in at the end for their send-off. That was my third time tearing up. Also, I almost forgot, it's poetic how David is the one to help us at the end. Someone who sees himself far removed from humanity, who took the inspiration of Chaldea's moral of that humans can do good, and sort of became inspired in remembering their stories, maybe to get closer to that idea of humanity that he feels is lost. It was such a nice moment. I literally jumped up from my seat when his sprite appeared. Because throughout that, I was kind of wondering. I was like, yeah, he was a part of the underworld at the end of Lost Belt 7. It didn't completely rule him out, and so when I didn't see him in the final battle with Morris, I was a bit curious. I was waiting for him. I saw Kadok, Ophelia, Pepe, Hinako, Krishtari, even Beryl, but David wasn't there. And so that got me a bit curious. I was like, where is he? Where did he go? So for him to pop out right at the last second was incredible. And not only that, the small reveal of his former name being Blue Book also brings some interesting questions. And I feel David is gonna be that one that when there is a part 3, is gonna be the one to pass the baton onward. Of course, because, he's the one along with us, the only people, us and David, who remember what happened to Chaldea. Their journey, the Lost Belts, the singularities, everything relies on him and us as the players. Not only that, the idea of, really, I think I'm so satisfied with where it ended up. Rather than a continuation of Grand Order, I kind of just want a spin-off of where these guys are in this normal timeline, What are the Cryptors doing, having not gotten involved with Chaldea? What about Mash and Fujimaru doing, right? If there's one thing I wish was included in the epilogue, was that after story. Just something small to give that hint of where they're at and essentially what they've accomplished up to that point. Because when a part 3 comes, I really don't want Chaldea, or at least the Chaldea we knew, to be a part of it. I see this normalcy as the reward for enduring all that. Which is why, if there is, I would really like it to be focused on David. That nature to do good, as spoken before, could really be a nice driving point for his character arc throughout a potential part 3, where whatever it plans to do, it essentially helps him regain the humanity he feels he doesn't have. Something like that. And if you want to know the scene I cried the hardest on, that was right before the David reveal, and at first, it's so weird because there's some part of it that I could see as kind of silly, getting the name and sprite association with all the other Chaldeus members who've been here for years and we never really got properly introduced to. But then we get that CG of Novum Chaldea saying their thanks and the goodbye, to where I only read it through blurry eyes both times. It moved into then yet another really, the David scene, but then the heart-touching moment between Mash and Fujimaru as they walk past the finish line, and solidifies that there won't be another game like this, even when there does come a part 3. How so expertly it crafted this story from something that started off as pretty meh to a game that has sparked continuous inspirations and a positive outlook upon my life that I won't see constructed in the same way ever again. Even still, a good month after I finished it, that void is still very present. I want nothing else but to play the entire game again from start and make a series on it, going over everything, just because this really set in how special of a game it is through all of its faults, its many faults. But the highs it reaches is one of a kind and so out there in how it comes about that I'm kinda sad that I don't know where it's going to go from here. And yet, at the exact same time, I feel satisfied, at peace if we don't get a lick of anything else. That's how well I feel they reached the end here. But that lick, we did eventually end up getting. Again, one of the reasons why I took so long to properly record this, the beginning of After Time. Actually, I'm probably going to record this later down the line. My voice is shot, so thank you for sticking with me, and I'll be right back. Alright, some time has passed, so originally, how I was going to end this video before After Time's reveal was essentially this. I love Fate Grand Order. At the same time, it's been a continuous stream of content for 10 years now on the JP side of things. Following that, having to constantly keep up with it time after time throughout the year, as well as all the resources and steady development the devs have been doing. Going any further than a part 2 at this moment would just feel fatiguing. That's a natural course of events. I mean, following something so steadily, without really any breaks, that's bound to happen. Both as a active player and I would also say on the dev side of things, without having nearly as much time to kind of take a fresh look at everything and dive straight in to create unique spins on this sort of gameplay formula and the character's story and so on. After Time is essentially this solution, this bridge between the ending of part 2 and a potential part 3, taking on a more lower stakes situation while also allowing for a steady stream of content throughout this next year. And though I did say that yes, I was a bit fatigued, this prologue that they've given actually introduces a few things that I find quite interesting. In short, a beast is isolating Chaldea 1 second before they reach that finish line, creating this weird hybrid of the modern Chaldea and also the one during the Epic of Remnants. It also gave return to Olga Mari, who now is participating as director of Chaldea. And though it seems like, at first, it's a bit of a hamper on her end, I do think it can do wonders for her character if handled tastefully. We are also getting helped by the Grand Assassin, Azrael, who is looking out for the beast and is very suspecting of Olga, given that I don't think everything is resolved with her and Morris. But over this next year, and it's most likely going to be a year, I think Azrael has a line where he says he can only be active for around that time. So I don't think it's going to be overextend its welcome and is most likely going to be this transition between part 2 and part 3, if that does get announced by the end of this year. And it does do some things I like. For example, how it doesn't overwrite the ending and making it an inevitability in the end. I can't help but draw comparisons to this After Time to things like Kagetsu Toya for Tsukihime and Hollow Ataraxia for Stay Night. There's a sort of playfulness, cheekiness to how it's setting up this premise, but there's also a few strings that it kind of leaves behind, you know, mainly with Azrael, Olga's random appearance here, along with the sort of unfulfilled. It's difficult to say unfulfilled, but there's certainly room to expand upon those Olga plotlines, the Mars plotlines. So I can't help but feel it's taking that sort of fan disc situation, taking all the plot threads that seemed a bit loose in the main story and finding a way to tie them all up meaningfully. Depending on where it wants to go, we could touch on a lot more about Marisbury, Daybit for that matter. Maybe we can get a glimpse into what he's doing and his mindset in the midst of everything. The best thing I think this can do is further establish Olga's character. After everything that we saw she went through, having time in her prime where she can just be with the people she cares about in these final seconds, I think would do wonders for her character. We could also see that possible foreigner ordeal call that was brought up in an interview with Nasu. I believe he said something like, it will come at a time that no one is expecting, which also plays into two other factors. One being that in that final battle, it was the event tree where Hokusai appeared, and she said something like the outer... I'm not too familiar with her character, I haven't really read the events that she's in, but the foreigner part of her was essentially banned, not able to participate due to something with the outer gods, which also haven't really had much explanation in general. Then there is the fact that Part 2 on the main menu has the clear tag, much like how Part 1 and 1.5 does, but the ordeal calls don't, for whatever reason. I don't think it's because of the free quests I've yet to clear. You'll probably see me grinding some of them in the background here. There's definitely something more going on. This sort of brings me to wondering about who the Beast is, the main antagonist that is causing everything. It could be Olga, like the Grand Assassin Azrael suspects, but I do find it incredibly weird how they made Morris not completely fall. Instead, they did this weird thing where she escaped through a dimensional rift at the last second to preserve herself. And that seems very weird, right? Because when it comes from a finality, satisfying defeat of the main antagonist, it would be a clear cut, they're gone, they're not in the picture. To have them escape is that weird sort of, are they gonna do something with her in the future, right? It was made incredibly clear that they could have chased after it, but that would have been sacrificing their efforts, so they just kind of ignored it and went on. So with Morris's ego, that they've essentially probably slowly come to realize that they have over time, could they find some sort of love that turns them into a proper beast? And sort of does this exact thing for Olga? I don't know, it's so weird to make theories, because they can really just pop out anything. You have to see many levels ahead and kind of instill the logic in the fantasy element, which in Type Moon's case, that is so deep. I'm not the person to be tying everything like that together. We did get the first event that comes out after time, and one of the reasons why I took so long was because I wanted to see how they would bring it up, and they kind of just ruled the beast interference out right at the gate, so I don't tend to read the events anyway, and that just kind of saved me some time. Where I will kind of find an issue is how the main story chapters for this are going to be handled. Because the past few years, we've only had 2 main story chapters a year, and I don't know how essentially this one arc will settle with having only 2 story chapters to resolve it, unless they up the production to like having a major chapter each season. I'm interested because I don't know how it's going to play out. And while that kind of makes me a bit uneasy for how it's going to affect the main story, and especially if these are plot threads or points that couldn't have just been included with the longer final chapter, I hope that's not it, and I hope this has a firm purpose in the wider scale of everything, and actually be something that we look fondly upon that it happened. Right now, it's just very uncertain. And a big part of that, I think, comes from the waiting game we've been playing. Ever since the end of Lost Belt 7, they built up this final chapter, we're like, alright, we can't wait to go in to see how this is all gonna end. And then they bring up the ordeal calls, which go on for 2 years. And then we get this finale, it's satisfying. But then we get another branch from that then says, oh, we're gonna have to wait another year to see the full picture. And in the moment, it feels very disappointing because we thought we got everything, and then it's like, okay, wait another year now to see the potential that this could have. And it's that potential I want it to reach, but at the same time, and very kind of tired of waiting. But if it's taking on the role of a hollow ataraxia, then I don't know why I'm really doubting in the first place. Mainly because I don't think there's ever been a Nasu story that's disappointed me in how it tied everything together. If After Story manages that, that would be a first. And just from the track record, I don't have any reason to doubt, which is why I'm kind of looking forward to it. I hope everything that we go through in this After Time isn't something that could have been included in the final chapter if done slightly differently or if given more time to be fleshed out. I hope that's not the case, because waiting a year for those small plot threads to be tied back is asking a bit too much. It's another one of those wait and see situations, but for the most part, I'm keeping a light, hopeful heart whenever we get the main story bits. I'm looking forward just to see the direction it's going to go in and the potential things that we could touch upon in the future. Anyway, wow, I'm looking at the recording here. An hour and 30, this is the most I've ever talked directly, I think, for a video. But I think that'll have to do here. I think I've touched on everything I wanted to talk about. I have my notes, and yeah, after, I guess, the fact that I can talk about it for over an hour and a half, even with all my ineptitude, touches that there was a lot of talk about, so let me know your thoughts. I have seen a lot of dissenting opinions online about how this ending turned out for a lot of people. Some weren't so favorable. For me, it was all I could ever ask for it, so I'm just very interested about the reception and everything. Please feel free to leave all your thoughts. I would love to talk to you guys about it as well. Maybe a bit more in depth, maybe something I could have expanded upon that, in the moment, my brain can't properly function to wrap and tie everything together. I would appreciate that a lot, and thank you all for sticking by me for however long this is, with all my probably vague sayings of "that was so cool" or whatever. I appreciate it. So, yeah, I think that's it. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and later.